Welcome to SchezzWho, your top spot for politics. My role in bringing great content on current events requires your role as a great viewer. So, of course, like this video. Of course, subscribe to this SchezzWho channel and comment on this video. And let's shout out that which gets this show going, beginning with Mr. Farley Perkins at the Farley Perkins Agency. He'll help you out with insurance in Hampton Roads if you hit up 757-271-6655. Also, ELG Sweet Boutique, which is a great restaurant in Portsmouth for sweets like shakes and ice cream. So look them up at 340 High Street in Portsmouth. There's also some great Southern-based food out of Miss Ellen's Kitchen at Ellen's Homestyle and Barbecue Express with two locations, Virginia Beach, across from Regent University, and Portsmouth on Portsmouth Boulevard across from Victory Crossing. Don't forget, Positive Vibes Incorporated by my good friend, Mr. Seiko Varner, help you out financially. And he's a great entertainer, great DJ. And don't forget, he also invented the Hampton Roads Green Book, which is a great application to help find Black-owned businesses in Hampton Roads. I also want to shout out the Black Swan Mindset Chronicles, which is a show part of SchezzWho, done by my great wife, Andrea Dixon Schesventer. Look, there are more episodes coming this upcoming weekend. Now, tonight, SchezzWho brings on Hailey Louise Shoup Dollar. She's a single mom to 4 daughters. She's a disabled combat veteran who faced enemy fire while providing casualty care in Mosul in 2009. She runs a small business that specializes in marketing. She's a paralegal and a community volunteer. She's worked for several federal agencies, and she even has 2 master's degrees. She's Newport News born and raised, and there's more to describe her, of course, much more, but in her community efforts. But why don't we just bring Hailey on to speak for herself? Let's bring her on right now. How are you doing, Miss Hailey Dollar, this great evening?
I'm doing great. It has been a day. I work a 9 to 5, just like most of the people that I want to represent. And so, I'm actually really looking forward to this time to speak with you and discuss topics and see where we go from here.
Excellent. I have been through the peninsula many a times, especially when I recently worked in James City County. So I had to travel through Newport News quite a bit. So I'm very interested in your run to see what you might be able to provide for Newport News. Because if I understand this exactly correct, the HD 70 district represents about 61,000 Newport News residents. And I want to give you some gimmies, some very easy questions at the start from uncontested stuff. So what are your favorite things, businesses, organizations, parks, scenes, and whatever in Newport News?
So one of my absolute favorite restaurants is Sang Kung. It's a Korean restaurant. I've been eating there for many years. Great locally owned business. One that's new that I really love is called Pizza Sam's 757. It's where the old Luigi's building used to be. If you're from Newport News, you know about Luigi's. Sadly, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was definitely a childhood favorite. There's so many great places to eat around City Center. One of my favorites is Chef's Market. I actually recently had an event there, and I plan on having a victory party there next week. So great locally owned business. There's Fin and Tonic. There's just so many great places. One of my favorite places to go to is the Surge Park in Newport News with my kids. The trampoline park. We've had so much fun there. I mean, there's just so many different things to do. The Mariners Museum, the Living Museum has always been a childhood favorite of mine. I plan on going to the dinosaur exhibit with my twins soon because dinosaurs are like their favorite thing right now. So honestly, I'm terrified of them. But I'm doing it for the kids. Jurassic Park was never fun for me.
I do remember visiting the Virginia Science Museum up there to see dinosaurs back in the day. This would have been in the 90s when I saw that. So it is a great exhibit. And I encourage as many people who are watching this in the Newport News area, give it a look because it's great for the family, even if they might be a little scared of some dinosaurs.
Well, they're supposed to be bringing in a bunch of new models, like huge, amazing, like, really revamping it because they put a permanent fixture in there. Back when you and I were kids, it was kind of,
Mhm.
in the summer and the fall, whenever they arranged it for, not, for a long period, but they have a whole area of the park now when you walk in the outdoor exhibit that, the kids can play at. There's activities, like, it's really great.
It sounds like a lively thing. I have plenty of nieces and nephews, or I think, who might enjoy that. So I'll remind them to give that a shout out. Next thing I would like to ask is what has been like your most influential to you, your worldview, part of public service to this point in your life? And if so, what agency might it have been?
So, what agency has influenced my view on the world? Like government agency, or are we speaking of maybe a person?
Something like that, maybe a person if you wish, but
Okay.
you've done so much. Which one really stands out to you, or if anything truly stands out, or if it's just a collection?
Well, in my work with the federal government, whether it was my active duty military service, working for the Department of the Army, and then going on to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, I have had very interesting experiences. But what I've taken away from them is I've met just so many incredible people. And when you work for the federal government, depending on where you are, you find very quickly that there's always, no stone left unturned. There's always something that needs to be done, and there's a lot of inefficiency. And I've always found myself the most comfortable when I'm falling into line with other people that are like, there are huge problems here. We need to address it. And generally, these are problems that aren't being considered by higher management because they don't really have the foresight to see the future and why these can be potentially huge issues. So, in all of my years doing advocacy work, suicide prevention, it has bled into my personal life, my professional life. So I wouldn't really even say it's one agency or really one period that I've worked in my professional life that's been the most influential. It's been kind of just a giant mix of things, a giant mix of experiencing people and how they live, what their problems are, what their perceived problems are, what their perception of the world is, and how things work. It's been interesting. I feel like I'm constantly in an educator role, even if it's something that may seem super simple to other people. I feel like I'm constantly teaching people something, whether it's medically based, whether it's just speaking frankly about my experience in this campaign and this race. um Gosh, it's just there's so much, but what inspires me generally is just helping people, just being that voice of reason, or just being that friend to say, okay, well, I may have bad news to give you, but I'm going to tell you, this is what's happening and this is where we're going to go from here, or these are the options where we can go from here. Let's collectively figure out the best plan.
Now, going from that in your knowledge of community and how you want to help community, I want to shift more toward political aimed questions now. As I do that, I want to make sure to be as fair as I can by saying from the jump that I am a progressive Democrat. So you and I are probably going to disagree pretty easily, but I just don't want to be like disrespectful in any of these questions or maybe pushback. So, first,
Mhm.
one of your masters, because you have two,
Mhm.
was in emergency and disaster management with Homeland Security.
Yes,
And
with a concentration on Homeland Security.
mhm. And Trump just said today that he wants to phase out FEMA after the hurricane season. And by the way, that ends November 30th. So this stuff seems a little mind boggling to me. And you've studied this concept and you know how important it is. A federal role in emergency management, I don't think is redundant or is it not needed. So I think the funding is important. Like here in Virginia, what are your thoughts on that?
So, although that is a major national level issue, what I think that they're trying to do within the federal government is they're trying to run it more like a business to make it more efficient. And as we've seen with certain cutbacks, drawbacks, investigations that are being, held as to where funding is going, they have had a lot of progress in, hopefully saving us as the taxpayers money. A lot of times we can't see the bigger picture. So for someone to say, okay, we want to kind of slash FEMA after this time period, I don't think they're actually really meaning like we're just going to cut the agency out. I think what it is that they're probably trying to attempt to contingency plan for the numbers that may be necessary. Now, you also have to understand that when it comes to FEMA, they have reservists as well. So it's kind of like joining the military. They have their active duty people, the federal workers that are there day by day, 9 to 5, 8 to 3, 7 to 3, whatever, whatever shift they work. And you know, you may not always be necessary, and that's why you have a reserve. So if something major happens, they can call upon the reservists. So it may be not necessarily a major cutback. It may just be like what you would consider a reduction in force, just because they're trying to save and allocate funds elsewhere. I completely agree with you that it is a necessary agency, but like any agency that we have in government right now, you can like, and it's not even just been like the last, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. We see that there's been major issues within almost every agency of government. It needs to be checked. So the thing is if we're finding that FEMA has wasteful spending, then most likely they do, and they're trying to scale back quite a bit. My campaign manager worked for FEMA for many years, and one of his roles was to go into different areas like Puerto Rico, Missouri, where these disasters had occurred. And his job was to identify the employees that were not doing their jobs, that were, adding to the problem of wasteful government spending. He was really popular, let me tell you. Like when people saw him coming, they knew, oh no, because he was there to ensure that government funds were, taxpayer dollars were being allotted for what we said they were supposed to be. And he discovered waste. And so what I can tell you is within that agency, major issues with waste do exist. And if the plan of action is to kind of scale back while they deal with these issues, while also attempting to combat whatever is in the future, that's a tough place to be in.
If you forgive me in case you hear any random noise like a small toy hitting the ground, I am in a room now that has 3 cats. So there might be random noise.
Okay.
My next topic is something that is near and dear to you as well, on the topic of healthcare, especially because I think you have expressed support and increased access to affordable healthcare. And this is another difference, I think, between you and myself. While you're the Republican here, I would point out, I think you have more in line with Democrat governor candidate Abigail Spanberger than myself, or Lieutenant Governor candidate Alex Bassani, who I had on not that long ago. I want much more done on healthcare than just access being maintained or increased. I want coverage. I don't want people going bankrupt on this or losing their lives due to coverage being lacking. To me, this needs to be covered at point of service by government, and we already have the VA and Medicare and Medicaid to have proof of concept that this works. So I want you to go deeper into what you would like to do as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates.
Well, we need accountability first and foremost, because you had mentioned, as a veteran, there's healthcare, and I can tell you that it's not great. I've been to the Richmond VA. I worked for them. I've been to the Hampton VA, and I have received absolutely terrible treatment on multiple occasions. Definitely open to share those experiences at a later time. But what I can say is had I not known, based on my background working as a combat medic, my bachelor's in medical management, my master's in health education, along with the segue to my master's in emergency and disaster management, lots of healthcare there. If I had not physically worked in patient care, I wouldn't see the writing on the wall. And right now we can say we're providing free healthcare to certain groups in our country, but I can tell you in some areas it's not that great, and the experience varies greatly. So we need to work on quality. We need to work on educational pathways, because we have huge issues with staffing when it comes to healthcare. COVID took out a lot of people. And if it didn't prior to that, it was the Obama era tax changes when it came to providers. A lot of people just rushed to retire. So there was a lot of major issues in healthcare that have led to it to be in the state that it's in right now. So I agree that we need to make healthcare more affordable, and it's something that we need to definitely do. But we also need to be focusing on directly right now the status of it. Like right now as it sits, and I'm sure you've experienced this, if you don't have a small fortune, you're not going to be guaranteed the best access to care. And you can tell the disparities between care and providers and things like that. The many issues we've seen in the past few months with insurance companies, denials of coverages. It's awful. So we need to buckle down and create a better plan of how to make, healthcare more affordable, how to make access to prescription drugs more affordable. I've heard so many people talk about how they're going to have to choose in between life intervening prescriptions versus having to choose a variety of groceries because inflation is literally killing everyone. So, yeah, I believe that we need access to healthcare. We need it to be better. We need the quality to be better. We need to be treating our first responders, our nurses, our healthcare staff. We need to be taking care of them as well because they're suffering from extreme burnout right now. A lot of them don't have very good benefits either. And you're starting to see them retire due to high turnover rates or choose other career paths. So it's quite a bit of a mess right now, not just in Newport News, but nationwide. And until we start to deal with these issues, sure, we can, push for free healthcare and this and that and the other. But I can tell you that free healthcare right now, you're getting what you're paying for, and it's not great.
Shifting to schools here, I understand that you would like to improve safety within schools, probably multifaceted. So I want to bring something to your attention. How about an initiative like Celeste Law? And this is a bill requiring school resource officers or another school official to make bathroom trips about every 30 minutes or so in the school to make sure no bullying or worse is happening in said school bathrooms. That was proposed by Peninsula Delegate A.C. Cordoza, and it was kicked to the curb by Democrats in the General Assembly. So just, I want you to take a second to go deeper into what you mean by safety in schools and how you would like to encourage it and make it better.
So bathrooms in schools and bathrooms these days tend to be a pretty hot topic. Don't they? Everybody has an opinion on them. And frankly, I can tell you that, the way people are looking at like possibly having a resource officer pop by the bathroom, I don't think it has anything to do with something nefarious. It's more so of, and I've actually experienced this within the last year, and that's why I'm laughing because it's really not funny, but it's just like, wow, oh, of course this is coming up. But, my children have experienced kids doing things in the bathroom. It has become an issue, like drug use, certain inappropriate activities that don't need to be going on between students. So kids in their bathrooms these days, I can see that being a major safety concern when most people would say, well, what is this really about? But I can tell you based on of my own children's experiences that they've come to me and been like, Mom, there were kids smoking weed in the bathroom. And I'm like, in 7th grade? What? Like I would have been terrified. Or, hearing about certain adolescent coitus that is happening that, it doesn't have a place there, so I can see why they might want to have someone stop by. And I think that if that is the case, then they should definitely, and it's going to have to take some major allocation of resources because, if I'm a parent and someone's going to be checking out my child's bathroom, I want them to be of the same gender. I don't need some, male officer bursting into the girls' room or vice versa, female, So that it's an interesting concept. And I would like to, discuss with AC in the future how he plans on deploying, this, like how and that's where a lot of questions come into play when it comes to politics, because you can write out a policy and say, this is what we're requiring. But what does that actually look like to you? Where is the basis need coming from? And I can tell you that based on, what I've seen in the last couple of months, that unfortunately checks on not just restrooms, but probably other areas of the school. I mean, they should be patrolling in a sense because, kids like to sneak around. They do stuff. They're up to things if they're not being, monitored appropriately, or even if they are, sometimes they still, life will find a way.
Like Jurassic Park. I want to take a second subdivision within your school topic here. Could you
Oh,
also
you just got me in a little jumbled. Hold on.
Yeah,
Okay.
give it a second here. All right.
There we go. Okay.
All right.
There we go.
Yeah, it does sound a little less jumbled. How about this? A little more on the same topic of schools, because you're also concerned about teachers and burnout with teachers and such. I know on the peninsula, there was recently the issue of the teacher who was shot by a student. So, are there many different ways you would like to help teachers, specifically in their profession, as being a delegate? What would be your role to try to help that out?
Well, a lot of it is just with basic accountability. When you're referencing that teacher who was shot in the hand, and I remember reading about that and the whole case and thinking it was just one of the wildest things I'd ever heard of, because it had been said multiple times that the student had been reported for aggressive behaviors in the past, that this teacher had brought up concerns, that students themselves had brought up major concerns, multiple students. And it was like the chain of accountability of the adults in this situation. They weren't taking this seriously. And look at what happened. And I think that ties into a lot of these administrators, these teachers are overwhelmed. A lot of it has to deal with classroom sizes. It has to deal with the fact that I don't feel that they're being given the proper tools to deal with high conflict situations. Teachers shouldn't have, and my grandmother was a teacher for, gosh, over 20 years in between Newport News and York County schools. She taught everywhere from Tab to Huntington and had very differing experiences. And in no way should teachers feel like they need to be attacked. And you know what? I'm sorry to say this, and it may not be a popular opinion, but if our current teachers and administrators are under the imminent threat of having to deal with children bringing guns to school, bringing knives to school, physically assaulting them, then perhaps we should consider maybe bumping up their pay. In the military, they give us what's known as hazardous duty pay when you go overseas, because you could get shot, you could get stabbed, you could fall off a cliff, anything could happen. But that pay is meant to represent, that you are aware that there is a certain level of risk here and that you're being compensated for that outside of, in your back, in the States goes away. But the thing is until we can provide a better environment for our teachers, the administrators, the therapists that are in the schools that are needed, the nurses, the multitude of workers that are there to make sure the operations can go somewhat smoothly during the day, if they don't feel safe, how can they do their job? Like, really, how can you focus? And if the adults in the room don't feel safe, how are they supposed to make the children feel safe?
Mm-hmm.
So what it boils down to is going to be community awareness and initiatives to ensure that we are holding the correct people accountable for not passing on information, for not bringing light to when potentially hazardous situations are present. And you know what? If they are present, what is the follow-up plan to this? Because, in my experience, most of the time, if a kid does something like that, they get suspended, they're off to juvie, you never hear from them again. But what is the plan of action following that? I've seen many times that students that have had reckless and abusive behaviors, on the elementary level, they just move them around or they become issues in other spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Students like that, whether it may be a long-term, short-term, or acute issue, need individualized attention. They need more attention. You're not going to be able to fully lead a classroom with 20, 30 kids and expect the majority of them to be successful. You have to employ a multitude of different tactics. And especially with the integration of, social media, when COVID hit, they were all on laptops. I feel like now one of the greatest challenges is inspiring kids to want to get motivated and to do work and to actually learn. You don't see a lot of motivation for that. There's not a lot of hope for the future. There's not a lot of excitement around going to college. And there's not really just kind of that team spirit, repertoire anymore of, look at what our lives are going to be, look at what we can do. And I think a lot of that has to deal with the fact that, a lot of them are having to hustle on their own. A lot of kids from single parents, they're really having to rock it out with, not having the extra, mom time to sit down and do homework and things like that. And that can be tough if they don't have structure in their lives at home because their parents are having to work 2 or 3 jobs. Where is that structure going to come from? And is that the responsibility of teachers getting paid, gosh, what are they making now? Not enough.
Mhm.
So if we're going to put all of these responsibilities on these teachers, and try to find a way to alleviate the weight or find a better way to communicate between parents and teachers and relay, reasonable expectations, we're going to have a much bigger mess moving forward. And that's how it all starts with safety. But there's so much to that because it's multifaceted,
Mhm.
and all of the issues that I'm sure we'll discuss are conducive in some way.
And I also want to shout out a couple of comments that have popped up here on the YouTube feed from Mr. John Thomas. Fiscal year 2025 cuts are up to 11 million in VA, and I don't know if he explicitly means state of Virginia or the Veterans Administration, which also has that same acronym, so it could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
And we transferred to SRO funding, so we also commented on that. So thank you, Mr. John Thomas, for commenting. Mm-hmm. And I want to move now to the car tax. So you, Winsome Sears, Abigail Spanberger, they all want to eliminate the car tax. And as bipartisanly popular as that seems to be, it would eliminate roughly $3 billion a year in revenue to Virginia. And that money largely goes to localities like Newport News. So what are your overall thoughts on that?
So my overall thoughts on the car tax, or really any personal property taxes, we need to find ways to abolish them, get rid of them. They're cumbersome. When you buy any piece of personal property, be it a car or a house, you pay property taxes on that immediately. That should be the end of it. To make up for the deficit that would come following that, I mean, there have to be other creative solutions. We're looking at trying to move more industries into Virginia in a safe way. So we could bring, more industries in, more jobs, create better revenue, invest more in healthcare. Like that could be a big one. I don't know. Just common sense solutions. One of the leaders in the Libertarian Party and I had a lovely chat when we were door knocking on Saturday. And they spoke to me about a bill that if they wanted to propose in the future about an industry that they support. And they were basically breaking it down for me. And they said, Hailey, I'm going to take this before a multitude of other elected officials, but I wanted to see your standpoint on this. And with this business plan that he formulated years ago, he's been trying to push this for years. And I guess it's finally going to get visibility with the current issues afoot. But basically, with this plan that he had come up with this industry, if brought into Virginia, would cover all of the car tax. 60% of that they would be able, the revenue populated from the taxation of this product, 60% of that could pay off the car tax for all Virginians, with an additional 40% that could be allocated to any community program or any areas of need. So there are some industries that if we could bring them into Virginia, it could make major impacts. But if we continue to go down the road that we're going, not supporting small local businesses, not supporting our constituents, reinvigorating the economy, trying to get costs down, then we're not going to, it's just going to get tougher and tougher. Nothing's at this point, nothing's come down. Food is at an all-time cost. I think gas came down a little bit, but, I don't think a lot of people remember when you and I were young that gas used to be like $1, if not less. I remember that. I remember when I could fill up my tank for a big truck on like 20 to 30, $40, and now double, triple that. So we just have to figure out, not just as, and this is just, now I'm just on the city level, but when it comes to trying to negotiate with the state, which then negotiates with the Fed, we just have to find better ways to communicate between the parties, better ways to strategize so we can come up with real solutions. Because I feel like the biggest issues we see in politics right now is just people wanting to fight, and bicker amongst themselves, sling a bunch of mud and hate. But in reality, that is just a huge waste of time, and it is detracting from the overall mission of how are we going to provide the best experience to our constituents. And if we can't follow through on that promise, how are we going to be able to deliver that message instead of just covering it up and sugarcoating it and, being deceptive?
I bet that same individual that you went door knocking with would like me to ask the following question, considering his proposal. Where do you stand as a prospective Republican delegate on broader drug laws in the state of Virginia and how that goes to total incarceration rates, revenue for the state of Virginia, whether things are too much of a burden on communities that they need to be heavily regulated like they are? What is just your general thought on that?
So, when you say, a broader legalization on drugs, like what specifically are you referring to?
Let's
Because,
start easy because I think that same gentleman wanted uh, marijuana revenue generation,
okay, all right.
and
Well,
that's
I'm just,
a
I'm
very
just,
good one to start with.
I just want to be direct because I will say that in other states where they've done full legalization.
Ms. Haley, I do believe that you.
Sorry,
Okay,
someone was calling me. We've seen in states where they've legalized everything where it's just gone to absolute hell, and that's not what anyone wants. But when it comes to the legalization of recreational cannabis in Virginia, I believe that if done with a proper plan that has multiple levels of accountability, that it could have positive impacts to include keeping it out of the hands of minors, creating a positive revenue stream into Virginia, bringing new businesses, and it also eliminates the potential of lacing products. So by having people have legal access, it provides protections for them as the consumer, for their family members. A lot of that, you have to take a lot of community concern, into that factor because, public safety, also just being polite. One of the biggest complaints I hear amongst Republicans is they're like, well, we don't mind that. We just don't want to smell it. We don't want to be out in public getting blasted with smoke and wood. So I think a lot of it is just a misunderstanding of the issues. And I'm a firm believer that if big pharma and huge pharmaceutical companies can just sling the next big thing out left and right with no accountability for years and create issues like the opioid crisis, I don't see why not, government oversight and regulation of a product, much like with VABC and alcohol. I don't see why that couldn't work.
I want to shift just a little bit to jobs and thinking again of Newport News, where you look to represent. Now, the address of the shipyard is actually in Delegate Price's district, but they just furloughed about 470 people. And many, I bet, would live in your district and commute. And I just read today that Costco wants to relocate to elsewhere in Newport News. So you want to be a delegate, you want to represent the people there. What does Newport News need job wise, and how would you like to help?
Well, we need more jobs in multiple areas of industry. The issue is that people aren't investing in the next workforce, and it's interesting to see people coming up from schools that are underqualified. I interviewed with a shipyard a few years back for an instructor position, and I remember I had a moment where they asked me if I knew how to use a tape measure, and I was like, of course. And they said to me, well, Haley, not everyone knows how to use a tape measure. And I was like, oh, because I was taught in school, I was taught by family members, but you can't always assume that people are going to be knowledgeable of the resources and the knowledge available to them. So a lot of people, when they're coming out of school, don't really have a skill set entering the workforce. And we need to find ways to revamp trade programs, not just pathways to college, but pathways to careers, to where these students, when they're leaving school, have the ability to have some, have some adult skill sets, to where if they need to work a part-time job to make it through college, or if they want to jump into trade school, or if they want to just run a small business, they have, a pretty good layout of how to do that. So you can do that by welcoming more small businesses, first of all, supporting them. We saw COVID take out so many locally owned family businesses, and everyone took a hit. So we need to find ways to help these industries recover. There's many areas in Newport News with vacant buildings, properties that aren't being used, and we have to ask ourselves, why? What could we put here? What could be useful? And just making it a more welcoming place overall. When it comes to the Costco move, I can't really speak on that because I didn't make that decision.
Mhm.
But when it was brought to me and they told me about the location in which, it's being moved, I found that curious because it's not far from the original location and it's actually closer to their competitor. So I found that very interesting.
Mhm.
Who knows? But when it comes to the shipyard workers, there's got to be a better way. There's been a lot of talk about right to work when it comes to unionization and unions wanting to require that people automatically pay memberships and things like that. There's been a lot of talk about that, and I truly believe that you should have options. You should always have options. You should be able to say yay or nay, make choices. No one in that potential should be forcing you to pay money that you don't feel needs to be allocated in that way because it may not serve you. Um, I hope that with these, that the people that are represented by the unions are being, and everyone's being well taken care of, that there are pathways to other employment, that perhaps some of the contractors, because you'll see that happen from time and time again when contracts don't get renewed, when there's cutbacks, that's usually, a good time for people to revamp their resumes and they can maybe jump on board with another government contract. You kind of just have to play the game and ride the wave. I've done it. It's no fun. Nobody likes job insecurity, but the only way to drum up more business when it comes to the shipyard is going to be watching our military become refurbished. These drawbacks, although they're happening right now, may be effects of decisions that were made, much previous to right now. These may be consequences of other actions from other administrations because as we saw there were drawbacks to military spending and things like
Mhm.
that, and as we know the shipyard gets awarded government contracts. So if we've seen traditionally over the last few years drawbacks, eventually they're going to have to cut force somewhere until they have the need for those people to fulfill those roles. I mean, it's very stringent how they do these things, and it's tough, and it can be hard to understand. But you have to look at these things like you're running a business. And what's hard about that is that's how these people are minded when it comes to making these choices. Do they take a moment to think, okay, well, these people have families, they've got young kids, they maybe have parents they're taking care of. I'm not sure. But I know that if this was something that I knew was coming, I would ensure that the right channels of communication were open and that there was contingency planning for the fallout of that. So that way, these people, if they are to be displaced, they know what options are available to them. And that is, it's not the end of the world. Like, we'll find you something. There's got to be something. There's got to be a pathway. We'll get through this together, essentially.
My next question here would be more of political taste, I guess. I understand that the first bill you want to propose is a bill cutting property taxes. Now, no shade here, and I understand Republicans love them some tax cuts, but why is the first thing suggested as opposed to finding ways to increase wages in the Old Dominion is a tax cut? Virginia has a $12 minimum wage. I'd rather be paid $20 than save a dollar on $12. Or am I wrong?
So I think that the reason why, as you said, that Republicans like to just do tax cuts, because when it comes to the overall structure change of, you know, the economy, making such a drastic change would have major fallout immediately. So I feel like it's just easier to try to cut that. So we can say, okay, we'll cut this, we'll be able to reallocate funding. I think it just seems like a much easier fix than having to completely rebrand and reorganize all the areas of industry that are going to have to shift. I think that one day we will get to that point, hopefully soon, to where we can have a more fair minimum wage. I worked as a server for many years, and it's not enough to live off of. It's not enough to raise a family. And I think people have common misconceptions that you'll be able to do that. And people in our generations, we want more. We want more out of life. We want to be able to raise our family. We want to be able to pay 20, 30, $40,000 for a house, a starter house. You can't do that anymore. Our economy has shifted so much from an older mindset, yet our wages have not adjusted, benefits have not really adjusted. And it's going to have to come. Something's got to give. And I hope to see that happen in the very near future. And I would push for that. I would push for higher minimum wage. I would push for, probably both, which is maybe why I'm a little bit unpopular. But there's always going to be a push to the shove. You have to just lay out what the options are and figure out, what is going to be the best for the people, while also anticipating things like natural disasters, things like that. But I think that being able to raise the minimum wage, yeah, I'm all for that.
Now, I also want to shout out a Facebook comment I just got from Ms. Andrea Diggs, who questions easier for who, and I don't exactly know which sentence she's responding to, but I think it's pertaining to within that question, so I didn't want to leave her hanging there.
Oh yeah, well, I think she's like, I think when she's speaking of the who, it's just for legislators in general, because when it comes to passing bills into law, having to hand them off, it can be it's very intrinsic. If you look at how many bills were killed last year, record number highs, and some of which had the potential to do a lot of good. But you have to understand that if you want to do good for people, you're having to really put your best foot forward. And if you can't justify and have a solid plan, like I said, for the fallout. So if we were to jump minimum wage to 25, we're also having to take into account the other industries where people, like our firefighters, our police, our nurses, medical assistants, phlebotomists, EKG techs, all the lower level staff. As a paralegal myself, I see paralegals getting paid $16.50 to $18 an hour, which is a little bit above minimum wage. But if you knew the level of responsibility, the training that you have to carry, the stress, having to manage multiple schedules, it's wild that the wages are so low, but they expect you to be so qualified.
Exactly. I would agree to that. This next topic is on to campaign financing, which you will know a lot of as you're currently running one. And you know how incredibly needed money is, because you need the outreach. It could become so corrupt. I'll easily point out Musk just flaunted having put Trump into office with his $300 million in campaign funds last year. Personally, I don't like that type of talk, that type of belief either with stuff like Clean Virginia funding so many Democrats, or Dominion. Heck, I just posted a status on how Dominion just spent about $650,000 on the account for Shannon Taylor to run for Attorney General in Virginia. And again, I hail from the Justice Democrats wing of the Democrat Party, and taking corruption out of money in politics is the very first thing they wanted. So what do you want on that matter?
Well, what I will tell you is that fundraising for a campaign is tough, especially in this economy. People give what they can. I have funded a lot of my own campaign, really scraping it together. But I've had a lot of very generous individuals that have helped me, with this. And I look forward to meeting with more in the future. But it is definitely a concern when you've got major areas of industry that are dumping thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not more. But when it comes to doing outreach to get people to vote for your candidate, that is it's a necessary evil. If I want to send out postcards, if I want to send out flyers, text messages, emails, everything has a cost. And the only way that you can let people know, hey, I'm out here, there's a vote going on, which, by the way, we're having record low turnout right now in the primary. I believe last week when we checked, only a few hundred people had come out to vote. So the thing is most people don't even know there's a primary right now. Most people are so busy with their own lives that they haven't even thought to go out and vote early because they have so much going on. So people need reminders. They may not have time to sit and watch a podcast like the one we're doing right now. I would hope they would, so they could get to know me as a candidate. But a lot of people may just, show up to the polls and pick the first one that's on the box because that's the one that looks good. And strategically, you'll see in primaries, people will do their best to try to get on there first. Unfortunately, I was blocked from doing that, so I'm number two. But there's so many strategic things when it comes to campaign finance and things like that. The money is generally what is perceived as what is going to drive your campaign, because and what you have and what you can spend just gives you more and more visibility, so voters know to get out and vote.
I want to put a couple more comments up from Mr. John Thomas over watching on YouTube. Again, thank you for that, Mr. Thomas. A lot of bills were never read or looked at because they had an R next to the name that drafted the bill. And something like that is like Celeste Law by AC and many others that seem to be a very political thing. And I'd imagine happens like so many good bills could be easily, flatly denied that are with a D next to their name too. I think this division, as you spoke on earlier, Hailey, is part of what leads to that. So I'm also curious by this next comment by Mr. Thomas. Yeah, funding is definitely not fun, in the same boat as Hailey with my campaign. So now I'm going to have to look up Mr. Thomas and his campaign. So that'll be cool.
Oh, yeah. He is the Republican delegate candidate for the 78th District, Chesterfield.
Well, then, Mr. Thomas, I would love to have you on next. I'm going to have actually Stephen Miller Pitts, who is running in most of Chesterfield, HD 75, tomorrow morning. So perhaps we can get a lot more Richmond representation coming on the show. So again, Mr. Thomas, thank you for watching, commenting, and all that. And from Ms. Hailey, I want to go on to a little bit more about government spending, because I think you have positions that cops, firefighters, they're good people who need to have more funding in their divisions. And I get curious here. Why do Republicans want more spending on something that seems authoritative to me, like cops or the military, but FEMA and education, they get cut? I would imagine it's just as easy for police and firefighters and military to see waste and abuse as any of those other departments.
Well, it's interesting. I haven't seen too many cases of waste with firefighters. But one of their biggest concerns is their level of workers' comp, their access to health care as well, hazardous duty pays, things like that. Currently, as it sits, if I'm not misinformed, baristas at Starbucks have better benefits when it comes to workers' comp than our firefighters. And when it comes to things like hazardous exposure, with the basic tools and things that they're having to use to put these fires out. I mean, look at what they have to do if a Tesla, ends up on fire. They have to use special chemicals, all kinds of special things because of the lithium batteries, if they can. And they're being exposed to these chemicals, which we don't even know the full gratitude of the future events that could happen. Much like, in veterans, we see Gulf War syndrome, which I have. We see instances of like Agent Orange, and they're the same types of toxic exposure to chemicals. So, I like to compare them. It's almost like they're in combat every day. They're fighting fires. They're saving people in medical emergencies. They may have to deal with high conflict situations between family members or people in the community. They may have to deal with people that are severely mentally ill. And what I believe is that why they need more funding is they do need to be taken care of. And the segue into the police, we talk about how they need more training, more constitutional awareness, because everyone, loves to play the videos where people are being wronged. And I'm a firm believer that in any area of industry, if you've got one bad apple, there's definitely probably a couple around them, because if you see something going wrong and you don't report it, you're just as complicit. So I believe that in investing in better training and better benefits, better accountability, that we can create a more well-rounded, first responder force by having better standards, by not allowing certain acts of violence and things to go unchecked. There has to be accountability. And that's why a lot of people may not like me as well as a candidate, because I like to speak from both sides of the table. Police are necessary. Their job is important. I know of many amazing, brave police officers. I've had to have them intervene in a few occasions in my life, and I probably would not be here had they not. So I will always be grateful for the good ones out there, and they need to be taken care of. But yes, I think that through better programs that are geared towards mental health, reactionary practices, that we could do a lot of good within these departments and make the community feel better as a whole, knowing that they're being watched out for, not being targeted.
And Mr. Thomas points out he's running in the
Oh,
76th.
excuse
So
me, I'm sorry.
clarification there. And again, thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you. Apologies, John.
Before I move on to the closing aspects of questions, I think it is worth noting because while looking you up to design questions and your biography, I was intrigued about your military history because you've gotten some notifications, accommodations, and you just mentioned that you have Gulf War syndrome, I believe you said, and I'm just curious if we can have you describe your military history in a way you would like to describe it, what you think might need to be changed specifically for people who are out of the service, who need better health care. And of course, I'm reminded of John Stewart when he spoke to Congress and just laid into them for not voting for the burn pits thing. And that seemingly was very anti-Republican. That doesn't mean all Republicans need to be against stuff like that. So I want you to speak on yourself, speak on what you served for, how you were able to help other people, what you saw, what you see now, stuff like that.
So the reason why I joined the military was to have a better life. Oh goodness, it's freezing. Let me see what's going on. There we go. We're back. But the reason why I joined military service was to have a stepping stone to a better life. I found myself in a very bad situation at a young age, dropping out of college at CNU because I just didn't have the tools in my toolbox to be a productive adult. I came from a place of extreme childhood trauma on multiple levels. Then joined the military, hoping that it'll fix everything. And it doesn't. You learn so much that just about everyone around you is traumatized in some way. And then you go off to war and you experience a number of things. I think one of the biggest things that I found was that you have to be strong, but you have to be kind. And being considerate is everything. You can easily hate someone. You can easily mark them as the enemy because they're different than you in some way. But if you do that, you'll lose out on so much. You lose out on the humanity of people. And going to a third world country when I'd barely left the East Coast of the United States was a life-changing, game-changing experience. It made me appreciative for literally everything. I remember the first time I came home and walked into a Walmart and went down the shampoo aisle. Like I had a moment. I had a full on, I won't say a meltdown, but I couldn't handle that there were so many options because I was so used to just having one thing that my family had to mail to me, not having access to things, being able to have choices in any kind of food you can think of when there's usually only two. It made me grateful, and it made me just very cognizant of how fragile life is and how you need to just appreciate everything as it comes to you. And that when you think you're going through your hardest struggles, well, buckle up. You never know what's around the corner. Every day is a new day for me, and I'm learning so many new and different things. But I feel that being in the military, it did make me a better person in some ways. It made me a strong person. It made it to where when I worked in a variety of industries in my life that I didn't take flack from a lot of people, and that it made me brave because now I know when I go off into the world, when I face any situation, the majority of the time, the first thing that pops into my head is, well, are you going to die? And the answer is generally no. So you can really, with that mindset, you can really do anything. I won't say I'm completely fearless, but there's very few men that I fear.
Now, let's unwind a little bit. Ms. Dollar, how can SchezzWho viewers, which includes Mr. Thomas there, learn more about you and follow your campaign? And remember, folks, Tuesday, June 17th is primary in Virginia. So in the next weekend and the days ahead, how should we look you up, follow you, and learn more all about you?
So you can go to my website, dollarforva.com, and sign up for the email list. I send emails pretty often. You can also give your contact info. We can add you to our text list, and you can follow me on social media. Um, you can just look me up, Hailey Dollar. My campaign page is just Hailey Dollar, Dollar for Delegate. My Instagram is Dollar for Delegate. My TikTok, Dollar for Delegate. There's not many delegation things on there. A lot of that was just fun I've had in the past couple of years and a few things from the campaign, but I post pretty often. So yeah, just follow me on my social media and you can stay tuned for what's to come and get out and vote early. There's been record low turnout, and although many people that traditionally watch this show may be Democrats, I invite you to take a look at your current incumbent, really look over what it is that they've done in their term and ask yourself, is this enough? And I'm not trying to convert anyone or do anything like that. But what I'm just saying is, although there may be an R next to my name, I am a very concerned, thoughtful, open minded person that is willing to chat, discuss, strategize with just about anyone so we can come up with a common solution of what is best for the people. So,
Now, hopefully, what I next ask isn't taking too much from what you just said, but I'm going to leave the link up for your website here because what I want you to do now for your last little bit is to just give your best elevator pitch as to why voters should look for you, and even if they're Democrat or not. What is the best reason to vote for Hailey?
the best reason to vote for me is because I care. I genuinely care. I want to make Newport News a better place. I want to just take care of people. I want to be a part of the change. I want to be a part of the shift in the conversation where we can actually have a conversation instead of a full-fledged fight. We should be able to come to a consensus. We should be able to speak freely, talk about our fears, talk about our concerns, talk about our hope for the future and how we can accomplish that. And I feel deeply that I am the best person to be able to do that.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, not only for that, for this conversation. Again, I want the viewers to look up dollarforvirginia.com and investigate whether or not they want to come out on Tuesday or I don't know when early voting ends. Is that
Well, it's best to get out by Saturday. So it's Wednesday now. So we got Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Get out and vote. Yeah, we'll be finding out the results from the primary the 17th. So we'll see what happens.
Indeed. And again, I want to personally thank you for coming on the SchezzWho. And I hope you have not only a great night, just a slew of great nights ahead.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. We'll catch up after Tuesday. How about for that?
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, SchezzWho viewers, for watching Hailey Dollar give you the best reasoning why she should be voted for by this Tuesday, by primary day. And remember, SchezzWho is your top spot for politics. I want to thank everyone for watching tonight, for commenting. Just really enjoying this content. And don't forget, like all these shows, subscribe to SchezzWho as a channel. Keep your political interests high as we make sure that Virginia gets better and better in the future. You guys have a great night.